The cold from the asphalt seeped into my skin. I opened my eyes, but all I saw was a dull gray walls covered in trash. My head throbbed like someone had split it open with a hammer. I reached up to rub my temple only to realize my wrist was bare. My vintage Rolex, the only keepsake my late wife left me, was gone. My wallet was gone. My phone was gone. Welcome back to Dad's Real Life Revenge. I'm Thomas Hartwell, 68 years old, and I've just been thrown away like a bag of garbage. Comment 1 so we can begin the story. It all started at the bank office, filled with the scent of air conditioning and fresh paper. I sat across from a loan officer who wore a polite smile. Beside me was Roger, my son-in-law. He was dressed sharply, his hair slicked back to perfection. Roger placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Dad, just this one signature, and Sarah and your soon-to-be-born grandchild will have a real home." He spoke with such emotion, as if I were the savior of the whole family. I looked at the loan document, $375,000, a massive number for a retired man like me. But Roger was the perfect husband. Every Friday he brought flowers home for my daughter. He helped me mow the lawn, fix the roof, and listen to my old stories without ever seeming bored. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. My hand trembled slightly as I held the pen. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I signed my name on the final line. Roger let out a quiet sigh of relief, but I didn't notice. He hugged me and said, "Don't worry, Dad. Everything will be fine." That evening at Murphy's, a crowded bar, we had dinner together under dim yellow lights and soft jazz music that made me feel at ease. Roger ordered an expensive bottle of wine. He poured me the first glass, then the second. By the third, he looked at me with a strange expression. "This one's for my gratitude, Dad." His words were flawless. Warm. Almost too warm. I took a sip. A strange bitterness slid across my tongue. It didn't taste like grapes or oak. It tasted metallic. Chemical. I frowned, about to ask, but Roger quickly changed the subject. He went on and on about grand plans for the future. I smiled, reassured that my daughter and her family were in good hands. Then suddenly, drowsiness hit me like a storm. Everything began to blur. Roger's face across from me twisted and warped. The laughter and chatter in the bar faded into the distance. I tried to stand, but my legs no longer felt like mine. The last thing I remember was Roger's smile. It was no longer the gentle smile of a devoted son-in-law. It was the smile of a hunter who had just watched his prey fall into the trap. Everything went dark. When I woke up, I found myself lying in a strange alley. My mind was still foggy, unable to grasp what had happened. Why was I here? I dragged my battered body out of the alley. My head was still spinning, waves of pain crashing through me. And above all, 1,000 questions flooded my mind. Where was Roger? I had nothing left on me. My vintage Rolex, my late wife's keepsake, gone. The $375,000 I had just borrowed from the bank, gone. Had I just been robbed? I felt like a lifeless shell wandering through a strange alley. It took me nearly 3 hours of staggering on foot to make it home. My body was completely drained. This small house, the one I had spent my entire life caring for. I thought Sarah would be waiting anxiously at the door, or that she had already called the police when I didn't return. I kept thinking it was some random robbery, and I worried about Roger. But when I pushed open the unlocked door and stepped into the living room, I was truly shocked. Roger was sitting comfortably on the sofa, holding a cup of hot tea. His face wore a perfectly staged look of concern when he saw me. Sarah sat beside him, her eyes swollen from crying. When I appeared, they both stood up immediately. But instead of running to me, embracing me, asking what had happened, Sarah stepped back, hiding behind Roger. The look in my daughter's eyes was strange. It was fear. I stepped forward, about to ask what was going on, when Roger rushed over and grabbed my shoulders. His voice trembled with fake sympathy. "Dad, where have you been all night? We've been looking everywhere for you. Why would you go back to your old habits at a time like this?" "Old habits?" I stared at him. "What the hell are you talking about, Roger?" I tried to shout, but my voice came out hoarse and weak. Roger glanced at Sarah and let out a heavy sigh. Then he spoke softly, just loud enough for both of us to hear. "I tried to hide it from Sarah. About you drinking with those strange men. I tried to stop you, but you pushed me down and left with those drunks." A story so simple, like a child's lie to get a piece of candy, to deceive my daughter. I turned to her. "Sarah, do you believe that I woke up after a drink Roger poured for me at the bar?" My head felt like it was being split open. I lost all the money I had just withdrawn from the bank. It was a robbery. I didn't say Roger was the prime suspect. Sarah looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Dad, stop! Roger already showed me the photos. You were standing at the bar with bottles of liquor laughing with strangers. He even had to pay them to take you home, but you attacked them and disappeared. I froze. Did that really happen last night? Why couldn't I remember a single moment of it? For a brief second, I almost believed it myself. But then, I calmed down. I started connecting the pieces. And in that haze, I realized this was a carefully constructed plan. And my son-in-law had orchestrated every part of it. The staged photos. The perfectly crafted lies. Roger stepped closer and said quietly, I didn't expect you to fall back into being an alcoholic again. And more importantly, you're showing serious signs of memory loss. That's something we need to add to your medical record. I looked into his eyes. I thought about his scheme. And in those eyes, I saw a flicker of satisfaction, the taste of victory. Of course, I was certain now. He had arranged everything. He had taken the money. He had succeeded in deceiving my daughter, stealing not just her trust, but her reason and her love for me. Sarah looked at me through tears, then turned her face away. Dad, go take a shower and get some rest. We'll talk about this after you've calmed down. I stood there alone in my own living room. A place where a victim like me should have been comforted, but instead I had become the one at fault. The injustice was suffocating. There was no way to explain it. A deep sense of sorrow and isolation swallowed me whole. It was terrifying to finally see the true face of my son-in-law. The man I had trusted the most had betrayed me. I realized I was trapped in a perfect snare. A maze of lies with Roger holding the only key. I staggered into the bathroom. I needed to wash off the filth, but my heart had already gone cold. As I peeled off my dirty clothes, my hand brushed against a small inner pocket in my coat. A tiny piece of paper slipped out. It was a receipt from Murphy's last night. I had no idea why it was there. I squinted at the faded thermal print. My heart began to pound when I saw a strange name signed under payer. A name that should never have been there, if Roger truly was the man we thought he was. A clue, the first thread to unravel his entire mask. I stared at the receipt. The signature wasn't Roger's. It was Robert Phillips. A stranger's name, but it carried a chilling weight like the breath of death itself. I quickly hid the receipt beneath the insole of my shoe. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Roger. He knocked on the bathroom door in a steady, almost unsettling rhythm. Dad, are you okay? Do you need any help? His voice was still sweet as honey. But now, all I could hear was the hiss of a snake. I took a deep breath to steady myself. I'm fine. I'm taking a shower, I replied, my voice trembling on purpose like an old man full of regret. There was a pause. Then he walked away. I knew he had been standing outside that door, smiling in triumph. He thought he had complete control over everything. Over me. The next day, something even more shocking happened. I mentioned the $375,000 loan to my daughter. To my surprise, Sarah looked at me with pity. Even more shocking was what she said next. Dad, you didn't sign any loan. You only signed a power of attorney for Roger to manage your assets. Your health hasn't been good lately. I froze. I shouted that I had heard the bank officer clearly mention the loan. But Roger quickly pulled out a stack of documents. Look, Dad, this is your signature on the power of attorney. He had switched the papers right in front of me, and I hadn't noticed a thing. He had turned me into a senile old man, imagining debts that never existed. It was horrifying. What was happening? In just one night, everything had been twisted into chaos. I had become a confused old man, and a diagnosis of memory loss had been perfectly planted in my record. That night at dinner, the air felt thick as lead. I forced myself to stay calm as I watched Roger constantly placing food on my plate. His voice was as sickeningly sweet as ever. Eat more, Dad. The doctor said early-stage dementia patients need plenty of nutrition. I glanced at Sarah. My daughter no longer argued with me. She simply wiped her tears in silence. She believed him. She believed her father was losing his mind. Roger began calling relatives. His voice carried endless sorrow. We're very sorry to say that Dad Thomas has been showing unstable behavior. He forgets things and sometimes puts himself in danger. He was isolating me, building a wall between me and the outside world. He wanted that when he drained every last dollar and sent me to a nursing home, no one would question it. I forced myself to stay sharp. I started writing everything down in a small notebook hidden under my mattress. Every action, every lie, every suspicious detail. I noticed Roger often went out at night. He claimed he was working extra to support the baby, but I knew he was meeting someone. The name Robert Phillips on that receipt haunted me. One afternoon, while Roger took Sarah to a prenatal checkup, I sneaked into his office. I searched through the drawers, but everything was locked. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted an old phone tossed in the trash under his desk. The screen was shattered, but the SIM card was still inside. My hands trembled as I slipped it into my pocket just as I heard their car pulling into the garage. That night, I pulled the blanket over my head and tried to turn the phone on. The screen flickered weakly, cracked in every direction. Dozens of unread messages appeared. I opened the most recent one. My heart nearly stopped. A woman named Linda had sent it. "Robert, how long are you planning to run? The child support is already 3 months overdue. Don't make me report your real identity to the police." I was stunned. Roger wasn't just a con man. He was a fugitive. He had another family, another life we knew nothing about. But at that exact moment, my door slowly creaked open. Light from the hallway poured in, blinding me. Roger stood there. His shadow stretched across the floor like a ghost. "Dad," still awake. "What are you holding?" He stepped closer, a smile on his lips that never reached his eyes. I tried to hide the phone behind my back, but my breathing betrayed me. He extended his hand. "Give it to me, Dad. You don't want this to get worse, do you?" He lunged at me. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just facing a thief. Roger yanked the phone from my hand. He dropped the act completely. His eyes were bloodshot, terrifying. "You think you're a detective," he hissed through clenched teeth. He threw the phone to the floor and crushed it under his heel, grinding it into pieces. The dry crack of breaking plastic sounded like my heart shattering. The next morning I was jolted awake by loud, relentless knocking. Not Roger. Authority. I stepped into the living room and saw 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in business attire. Sarah stood in the corner, covering her face, sobbing. Roger stood beside her, his face twisted with perfectly staged pain. "You see," he told the woman. "He had another episode last night, destroying things again." I tried to speak, but the woman raised her hand. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm a welfare officer. We've received reports that you've been exhibiting self-harm behavior and loss of control due to complications from dementia." I turned to Sarah. "Sarah, say something." He broke the phone. "He's the one lying to us." She looked up at me, and all that remained in her eyes was disappointment. "Dad, enough. Roger has been trying to protect you, but you keep hurting him. You need medical help." Her words struck like a fatal blade through my chest. The child I had loved and raised for 30 years chose to believe a stranger over her own father. They began searching my room. They found my scattered notes, the notebook hidden under my mattress. Roger picked it up and read aloud the parts where I wrote that he was Robert Phillips. "You see," he said, "he's imagining some kind of conspiracy. He thinks I'm a fugitive criminal. Classic paranoia symptoms." The welfare officer nodded, writing in her report. I stood there powerless, watching them turn my evidence into proof of my insanity. This humiliation hurt more than being dumped in that alley. I was being stripped of my identity in my own home. Roger stepped close to me while the others talked outside. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't worry, Dad. No one believes you. That $375,000 is safely in my pocket now, and soon you'll be enjoying your old age in a very special care facility." I looked out the window. A medical transport van was already waiting. They were preparing to take me in for mandatory psychiatric evaluation. If I stepped into that vehicle, my life was over. Roger would win completely. He would take the house. He would continue manipulating Sarah until she was no longer useful. Cold despair tightened around my chest. But deep inside, something ignited. A fire. He thought he had won. He thought he had cornered me. He forgot. I had survived the hardest years of my life to raise Sarah into who she is today. Just as the welfare officer stepped in and asked me to come with them, I caught sight of my neighbor Jessica, standing faintly behind the fence. She was holding something in her hand, and looking at me with meaning. A spark of hope flickered. I wasn't alone, and this game still had one card left. A card Roger never saw coming. He thought I was prey, but he had no idea. He was the one walking into a hunt, and I was the one setting the trap. Give me a like and comment too to fuel my fight back. I quietly stepped into the medical transport van without resisting. Roger stood at the door watching me leave, wearing a sorrowful expression, but I could clearly see the triumph in his eyes. He thought he had removed the final obstacle. He was wrong. Being underestimated is the greatest advantage an old man can have. Throughout the entire evaluation, I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I answered every question from the doctors calmly and precisely. I understood how this system worked. The harder you try to prove you're sane through agitation, the more insane you appear. So I chose silence and observation. 3 days later, I was released. There wasn't enough evidence to declare me mentally incompetent, but I didn't go home. I needed an ally. I went to see Jessica, my longtime neighbor. She welcomed me in with a cup of hot tea and a serious expression. "I saw everything, Thomas," she said. "Your son-in-law, he's not a good man." Jessica handed me a USB drive. "This is from the hallway security camera. It accidentally recorded Roger talking on the phone out on the balcony the night you disappeared." I plugged it into the computer. In the video, Roger was laughing loudly. He talked about a plan being completed, about an old fish taking the bait. He mentioned the name Robert, and a location in Las Vegas. A spark of hope ignited inside me, but I needed more. I needed someone who could break into his digital world. Jessica introduced me to Danny, a neighborhood teenager, brilliant with technology, but always labeled as trouble. Danny looked at me skeptically. "You really want to do this, Mr. Hartwell?" I met his eyes. "I have nothing left to lose." His fingers flew across the keyboard. He accessed underground forums' old data caches. 2 hours later, a beep. Danny turned to me, his face pale. "Mr. Hartwell, you're not going to believe this. Roger Robert Phillips is basically a ghost in the real estate scam world. He had a long list of victims. He targeted wealthy families who lacked caution. He married into them, drained their money, and disappeared before anyone could react." Danny pulled up an old photo from a local newspaper in another state. The man in it looked exactly like Roger, standing beside another woman. At their wedding, a chill ran down my spine. Roger hadn't just deceived me. He was repeating a script, over and over again, a professional destroyer of families. I clenched my fists. The injustice inside me hardened into something colder, more focused. I wouldn't just take my money back. I would make him pay for every tear Sarah had shed. Danny kept digging. He traced the digital trails. My $375,000 had been routed through 3 different accounts. The final destination, a major casino in Las Vegas. Roger was using my money to fund high-stakes gambling and prepare for his next escape. I stared at the screen. His flight itinerary for next week. He planned to abandon Sarah before the baby was even born. Run. Disappear. With everything I had worked my entire life for. But he didn't know I had his trail. I turned to Danny. "Can you pinpoint exactly where he'll be Friday night?" Danny nodded slowly. "I can. But what are you planning to do there?" Alone, I smiled. A smile that even unsettled me. "I'm going to collect justice." I began gathering what I needed. A plan was already forming in my mind. I was going to show him exactly what a senile old man could do. Just as I was about to leave Danny's house, a notification popped up on his screen. Danny gasped. "Mr. Hartwell, he's not traveling alone." My heart tightened. He just booked another ticket. For someone else. Danny turned the screen toward me. "And the name on that ticket?" I froze. He wasn't going alone. And the person traveling with him was the final key to this entire game. A terrifying truth was about to surface. One that made me realize I had underestimated just how ruthless Robert Phillips really was. The name on the screen hit me like a bucket of ice water. It wasn't Sarah. The man flying with him to Las Vegas was Mark Vance. Danny moved fast, pulling up everything he could on the name. Within minutes, the truth surfaced, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. Mark Vance was the fake officer who had come to my house, the one who had evaluated my mental state. A cold wave ran down my spine. Robert Phillips didn't work alone. He had a network, a system, people who impersonated authorities, cornering elderly victims, like me, pushing us into submission. They had turned my home into a stage, and I had been the only audience, blindfolded. I stared at Mark Vance's old record Danny found. A disgraced cop, kicked out for corruption. Now the right hand of Robert Phillips in multi-state fraud schemes. They worked like a machine. One played the perfect husband, the other played the law. I stood up and looked into the mirror. My face was worn, but my eyes, they had changed. The confusion of a victim was gone. In its place, something colder, a hunter. I pulled out the last envelope of savings I had hidden inside an old cookie tin. Money I had saved to buy a gift for my grandchild. Now it was fuel for my war. Danny looked at me worried. "You're really going to Vegas alone?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than enough, Danny. The rest is mine." I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. Mark Vance had connections. If I made a move too soon, they would vanish with everything. I needed to catch them off guard. At their most careless. I took a night bus to the City of Lights. Didn't sleep for a second. I replayed every step of the plan in my mind. I wasn't Thomas Hartwell anymore, not the broken drunk they believed me to be. I was a shadow, and shadows don't get seen. In Las Vegas, I rented a cheap room near the Bellagio Casino. Danny sent me GPS coordinates from the phone Roger was using. He was in a luxury suite, spending my money, living like a king. The anger surged, but I forced it down. Anger ruins precision. I bought a cheap suit from a thrift store, a fedora to shadow my face. Then I walked into the Bellagio. Neon lights. The constant clatter of slot machines. A world away from the alley where he left me to rot. Here he felt untouchable. I found him at a high-stakes poker table. Robert Phillips sat there holding a glass of expensive wine, laughing beside a young, beautiful woman. Not Sarah. Another victim. I stayed behind a pillar watching. Same script. Same fake charm. Mark Vance stood nearby, pretending to be just another gambler, but his eyes never stopped scanning. They were preparing to finish this job. And disappear. My heart pounded. This was it. I pulled out my phone and sent the message to Danny. Right on cue, a notification flickered across nearby devices. Robert's phone buzzed. He paused, opened the message, and in that instant his face drained of color, from warm to corpse gray. He looked around in pure panic. Like a man who had just seen a ghost in broad daylight. The message contained only one image. But it was the one thing he feared most. The one thing that could destroy his entire empire in a single moment. And that's when he realized the real hunter was already standing right behind him. Robert shot up from the poker table. The expensive glass of wine spilled across the green felt like a pool of blood. He stared at his phone. The image Danny had sent was a copy of an old arrest warrant Robert Phillips wanted in another state, a secret he thought had been buried forever beneath the mask of Roger. His hands trembled as he looked around. Mark Vance sensed it too. The fake officer moved in quickly, ready to escort Robert out. That's when I stepped out from behind the pillar. I removed my fedora and looked him straight in the eye. A calm smile formed on my lips. "Hello, son-in-law." My voice was soft like death whispering. Robert froze. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost dragged back from that filthy alley. "Thomas," he choked. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in a psychiatric facility." I walked closer. People around the table started watching. Robert tried to recover, gesturing subtly to Mark. Mark moved toward me, ready to grab my arm, but I stepped back and raised a blue folder high. I spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby, including the young woman beside him, to hear. "Robert, or should I call you a fugitive wanted for fraud? Where are you planning to run next with the $200,000 you're about to take from this woman?" Robert let out a mocking laugh. "What is this senile old man talking about? Who's going to believe a drunk with dementia?" He turned to the crowd. "Sorry, everyone. My father here. He's not well." I didn't flinch. I opened the folder and held up a photograph. It showed him clearly signing the name Robert Phillips on an old contract. Across the bottom in bold red ink I had written, "I found you." Robert's face shifted from pale to purple. He knew. The game was over. Mark Vance stepped forward, ready to use force, but casino security had already begun to close in. I had arranged for Danny to send evidence of Robert's credit card fraud to Bellagio security 10 minutes earlier. The overhead speakers came alive. "Robert Phillips, please remain where you are for security verification." Robert looked around for an escape. There wasn't one. Every exit blocked. He turned back to me, hatred burning in his eyes. You think you've won, old man. You'll never see a single dollar again. I looked at him completely calm. I don't want your money, Robert. I want the truth. And the truth is knocking. Mark Vance realized things were collapsing. He tried to slip away through a side exit, but he didn't know someone was already waiting. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the crowd. Strong, unshaken. Robert saw her and staggered back like he'd been electrocuted. Linda, his ex-wife, a victim he thought had vanished forever. She looked at him with absolute contempt. Long time no see, Robert. We have a lot to discuss. With federal agents. At that moment, Robert Phillips broke. Completely. He realized he wasn't the only predator in the room. He had walked straight into a trap far bigger than anything he had ever designed. I stood there watching the man who had destroyed my family tremble in fear. But this was only the beginning. Because what Linda and I were about to reveal, about the truth behind that $375,000 loan, would make Robert wish he had never been born. Robert staggered back when he saw Linda. Her presence was like a death sentence for his entire act. Mark Vance tried to bolt, but 2 large security guards had already sealed off both exits. I stood there feeling something surge through my veins. This wasn't blind revenge. This was justice. I turned to Patricia, the young woman Robert had been targeting. She stared at him in shock. I handed her a copy of the file Danny had prepared. Inside was the same fake real estate investment scheme he had used on me and on Linda. Patricia skimmed through it, then looked at Robert with disgust. You said you were a successful businessman. You said we were going to build a future here in Vegas. Robert lashed out. It's all lies. This old man paid you all. He turned to me, teeth clenched. Who do you think you are? You're just a dying old man headed for a nursing home. I stepped closer, just inches away. I'm not just an old man, Robert. I'm the man who saw through your cowardice. Linda stepped forward and pulled out a small recorder. We had planned this. The sound cut through the now silent casino floor. Robert's voice, clear, convincing Patricia to transfer $200,000 into one of his accounts. The same words, the same promises. A home, security. Robert collapsed to his knees. All the confidence of a professional con artist gone. Mark Vance panicked. I didn't know anything. I was just following his orders. I smiled. Then I handed security a phone, Danny's device, streaming live. Danny had hacked into Mark's dashcam system. The video played. Mark and Robert dividing my $375,000, laughing, joking about dumping me in that filthy alley, calling me a dead tree ready to be cut down. Sarah, if you could see this, you'd know your father isn't insane. I thought it, the pain tightening in my chest. Casino security handed both men over to local police. Cold handcuffs snapped shut around Robert's wrists. He looked at me begging now. Dad, think about Sarah. She's carrying my child. I didn't flinch. You never deserved to be part of my daughter's life. And that child will be proud to have a grandfather who never gave up. Linda, Patricia, and I went to the station to give our statements. We had everything prepared, every piece of evidence needed to make sure Robert Phillips and his partner would never walk free again. As I was signing the report, an officer walked in, his expression serious. Mr. Hartwell, you have an urgent call from your city hospital. My heart clenched. I answered. Sarah's voice. Dad, I'm sorry. I saw everything you posted online. Roger ran, and I'm at the emergency room. The words that followed made the phone slip from my hand. Something terrible. Something unimaginable. Robert still had one final card to play. A cruel one. Something he had planted inside my own daughter. Before he ran, I had to get back, immediately, or I would lose everything I love. Family is sacred. If this story means something to you, share it so the people you love never fall into a trap like this. I rushed out of the police station and caught the earliest flight home. The entire journey, all I could see was Sarah's pale face on the phone. Robert hadn't just taken the money. He had done something far more cruel. He had secretly been giving Sarah high doses of sedatives, keeping her in a constant haze easy to manipulate. Those very drugs had triggered severe uterine contractions the moment he fled. I ran down the hospital hallway, gasping for breath. In the waiting room, I saw Sarah lying in a bed, wires and tubes everywhere. She woke up, saw me, and broke into tears. Dad, I was so stupid. I let him hurt you, and the baby. I held her tightly. Now's not the time for that, Sarah. I'm here. At that moment, a group of federal agents appeared at the door. They weren't there for me. They brought someone in. Mark Vance. Handcuffed. The fake officer had been transferred from Vegas for interrogation. I stood up, positioning myself in front of Sarah's bed. My eyes burned as I stared at him. Mark lowered his head. Then he started talking. Robert had planned everything a year ago, ever since he met Sarah at a cafe. Every flower, every act of kindness, every moment of being the perfect son-in-law, all of it, a script. Even the doctor who diagnosed me with dementia was part of their network. Sarah sat there shattered, listening to every word. The man she had loved was never real. Justice moved swiftly. Authorities froze all of Robert's hidden assets. They traced the $375,000 through multiple digital wallets. A large portion was recovered almost immediately. 3 days later, the preliminary trial was held. Robert Phillips was brought into court wearing an orange prison uniform. Gone was the polished businessman. What remained was a desperate criminal trying to reduce his sentence. He saw Sarah and me in the front row. He tried to speak. The judge cut him off. On charges of fraud, impersonating a public official, and endangering the health of others, Robert Phillips is sentenced to 12 years in prison. Mark Vance, 8 years. The gavel struck. And just like that, the weight of months of humiliation lifted, washed away by truth. As Robert was led past us, he whispered in desperation, "You'll never have peace." I looked him straight in the eye. "Our peace begins the day you go to prison." Sarah squeezed my hand. She was stronger now. We stepped out of the courthouse into bright midday sunlight. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then my lawyer rushed toward me, holding a stack of documents. "Mr. Hartwell, we have another issue. The original loan from the bank. They're refusing to cancel the debt. Your signature on the second authorization document is valid." My heart tightened again. One last legal trap, carefully planted by Robert. If I couldn't undo it, we would still lose the house. I looked at the document closely, and then I noticed something strange. The date, the timestamp. Robert had made a mistake. A small one, but fatal. A detail only someone present that day could know. A silent witness who had been watching everything from the shadows, and that one detail was enough to turn the entire game around, one last time. I held the power of attorney in my hand and smiled. Robert thought he had won at the very last moment, hiding behind legal technicalities. But he forgot one small detail. The date on the document was April 14th. That was the exact day I was in the hospital for a routine medical checkup. Danny helped me extract my medical records, time-stamped down to the minute. I couldn't be in two places at once. That signature was a clumsy fabrication built on a copying method he believed was flawless. The bank had no choice but to cancel the debt once my alibi was presented. The house was safe. The recovered money from Robert's accounts was enough to settle every legal complication. I stood on the porch of my old home, breathing in the scent of freshly cut grass. The suffocating weight of lies had lifted. All that remained was peace and freedom. A few weeks later, Sarah went into labor. I found myself sitting in a hospital hallway once again, but this time everything felt different. No fear, no pursuit, only anticipation. A new life. Then, the cry of a newborn shattered the silence. My grandson had arrived. Sarah decided to name him Thomas Michael Phillips. The name Phillips was no longer a symbol of deception. It had become a reminder that we had walked through darkness together and survived. I held the baby in my arms, his tiny hand wrapped around my wrinkled finger. Family isn't perfection. Family is where we're allowed to fail, but also where we stand together against evil. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with both joy and regret. "You saved us, Dad." I shook my head gently and smiled. Justice is never too late if we don't give up. There's one last thing I want to tell you. Always be careful with legal documents. Don't let emotions blind you to warning signs. A truly good person will never pressure you to put your assets at risk. Trust your instincts, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. If you've made it this far, I know you found this story meaningful. Do us a small, quick favor: subscribe. Many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. I looked out the hospital window as the sunset painted the city gold. The journey of a 66-year-old man reclaiming justice had come to an end. I had recovered my money, my dignity, and most importantly, my daughter. But as I flipped through old newspapers while cleaning my office, something caught my eye. A small article, buried in the corner of the last page. A similar scam. Another city. The exact same pattern as Robert's. A chill ran down my spine. Was Robert just one piece of something bigger? Was the shadow of betrayal still out there, hiding behind new masks? I placed my notebook into a drawer and locked it. I hoped I would never have to open it again. But if evil ever came knocking, I would be ready. Because my name is Thomas Hartwell, and I know how to turn weakness into strength to protect what I love.